The Tyranids. From the darkness between the stars they flow, a tide of living nightmares. Their shadow is the funeral shroud of civilizations. Their hunger is the death of worlds. They know not hate, fear, or compassion, only the desire to hunt and to devour. They are the swarm. They are the tendril and the talon. They are the Tyranids, and to stand against them in battle is to kill or be consumed. Beyond the human galaxy, beyond the range of man-made spacecraft and astro-telepathy, lies the unspeakable cold of the intergalactic void. Few have ventured into this realm, and none have ever returned. It is the great barrier that divides galaxy from galaxy, a place where time and space conspire to hold the worlds apart with inconceivable distances. Yet the void is no longer empty. An immeasurably ancient and implacable intelligence moves through the cold and the darkness, its many eyes fixed on the distant glittering lights of our galaxy. The great devourer moves between the stars and hungers for the flesh of all who lie before it. This great organism, this monstrous entity, is known as the Tyranid race. Even by naming the great devourer, civilizations betray their ignorance. Every thought and action, every spark of life in the Tyranid race is bound and interlinked into a single mind, a single great entity that stretches over light years of space and is controlled by the immortal hive mind. 1 billion times 1 billion Tyranids stand at the rim of the galaxy, yet each one is no more than a single cell in the living body of the hive mind, the devourer of worlds. The Tyranids are a race of alien predators that are invading the galaxy from the void beyond its edges. Like swarming insects falling upon a precious crop, they devour all before them, consuming all life upon each world in their path and leaving nothing but airless rocks in their wake. They are a threat to every sentient species in the galaxy, and their numbers are ever growing. For centuries now, the Magi biologists and Order Xenos of the Imperium have sought to make sense of the Tyranid threat. It speaks volumes that, with the galaxy now in the grip of the Third Tyrannic War, and with humanity having fought more battles against these rapacious aliens than can be tallied, these luminaries remain bewildered and horrified in equal measure. It is clear that the Tyranids' technology is entirely biological, and far in advance of anything humanity has encountered in all its long millennia of conquest. Their war beasts are armoured in chitinous plates, or possessed of natural defences such as chameleonic abilities or veiling clouds of exhaled spores. Tyranid guns, blades, transport craft, even void ships, all are living beings, many taking the form of grotesque symbiotes grafted to their host creature for use in battle. The ammunition fired by Tyranid weapons is similarly organic, be ferocious, chitin-armoured beetles, gouts of concentrated acids or bioplasma, armour-piercing shard beasts or eruptions of bioelectricity. From blades that gnaw the flesh of their victims to tailored toxin spores, weaponized parasites, and even stranger weapons, the Tyranids display an infinite capacity for turning the mechanisms of life to the task of spreading death. This speaks to one of the few other certainties humanity possesses regarding the Tyranids. Their entire race seems fashioned solely for war. It has been observed that a few individual Tyranids display anything more than the most rudimentary sentience. Rather, each Tyranid appears to be but a single cell of an infinitely vast galactic superorganism. Mankind has dubbed this guiding presence the hive mind. As far as the Magi biologists can determine, it is the hive mind that drives the Tyranid swarms ever onwards towards the galactic core. Through the synaptic control web generated by specialized node beasts amidst the Tyranid ranks, the influence of the hive mind stretches across battlefields, worlds, and even the vastness of the void itself. Wherever the grotesque bioships of the Hive fleet swarm to attack, the presence of the hive mind moves with them and allows them to hunt and fight with supernatural synchronicity. What precisely the hive mind is, mankind remains ignorant too. Attempts have been made to tame the fear of the unknown by claiming that this alien species is a god, a galactic meta-predator, a gestalt psychic presence, and countless other strange explanations. Yet the truth is that the hive mind is so far beyond the understanding of the galaxy's sentient races as they are beyond the comprehension of the cattle they farm and butcher. This, it seems, is all that biological life represents to the hive mind. Not equals to be communicated with, but simply prey, to be found and then devoured. Since the first Tyranid hive fleet was encountered, the numbers of these alien invaders have increased at an alarming rate. More and more hive fleets surge through the extragalactic void, each displaying new and nightmarish adaptations and horribly inventive methods of predation. They coil and probe like the tendrils of some unimaginable vast monster. They push in from the fringes, drive up through the galactic plane, and crush and destroy everything they touch. The first warning that most worlds have of the Tyranids' approach is the shadow of the war. This psychic signal rolls ahead of the hive fleets like some smothering metaphysical fog bank. Its nullifying psychic static chokes off astropathic communication, leaving worlds isolated in the face of the onrushing swarm. It worries at minds and souls alike, spreading unreasoning paranoia and fear amongst the prey. Psykers are the worst affected, for their strange senses are far more susceptible to this insidious assault. Should they seek to employ their powers while engulfed by the shadow and the warp, there is every chance they will be driven mad or even slain by the chittering alien cacophony that overloads their minds. Then come the Tyranids themselves. Hive ships slide from the darkness like oceanic predators rising to feed. They smash aside the defense platforms and warships that seek to hold them back, settling in orbit above the prey worlds and disgorging untold trillions of warrior organisms to begin the hunt. At first, the prey fight back. Defense lasers scouring sporecraft and winged monsters from the skies. Aircraft spiraling amidst the descending predators with their guns blazing. On the ground, staunch warriors man their battlements and unleash storms of fire to reduce the attacking Tyranids to hillocks of charred corpses. Yet as more waves attack, and yet more, the guns begin to fall silent. Aircraft and war engines are destroyed one by one, torn apart or overrun, and their crews devoured. The barricades fall. Defenders become screaming, fleeing prey. Under the influence of the microscopic Tyranid spores, even the biosphere of the planet turns against the prey, choking them with toxins and dissolving them into raw biomass ready to be devoured. Only once victory is assured do the Tyranids begin to feed. Raw biological gruel flows up vast feeding tubes to replenish the waiting hive ships, who suckle at the world like fat ticks until nothing remains but a lifeless orb to be left hanging, cold and dead, in the void. First, contact. The first recorded encounter between the Imperium and the Tyranids came on the world of Tyran Primus in 745 M41. It was a conflict that would see humanity put a name to this new alien menace, and saw the beginning of Hive Fleet Behemoth's rampage through Imperial space. Yet it was not the only early contact between the Tyranids and their prey. It is difficult to say with any degree of certainty when humanity first encountered the Tyranid menace. Some records suggest that humanity and also the Eldar of craft world Iyanden discovered a bizarre Tyranid megastructure in the Tiamat system on the jungle world of Zephoria as early as M35. This edifice is said to have spanned a continent, and to have projected from its mass of chitin and emphyletic tissue a horrifically powerful psychic signal that drove the Eldar into fatal seizures. Rumour has it among the Order Xenos that this structure, and others like it, remain to this day, seemingly raised by the strange beasts of High Fleet Tiamat for some as yet undisclosed purpose. Then there are ominous tales from the Helican sector in M36, speaking of nightmarish winged horrors that match Order Xenos intelligence on High Fleet Ouroboris. The supposedly indigenous gene-stealers of the moons of Ymgal have also been discovered in the years since to be vanguard organisms for the onrushing Tyranid hive fleets. It is believed that the Tau Empire may have battled the toxic swarms of High Fleet Gorgon for centuries. Who can say? Meanwhile, what insidious forerunners of the Tyranid threat have been encountered by races such as the Necrons, not to mention more minor or isolated alien empires? Those, entirely devoured by the Tyranid menace, do not survive to tell their tales, after all. Yet for those few humans both privileged enough to possess knowledge of the Tyranids, and unfortunate enough to seek to counter their threat, the death of Tyran Primus remains the first known contact with this ghastly new foe. The first clue of the horror soon to fall upon Tyran Primus was discovered by Imperial explorators. In performing a census of the worlds near to the far-flung outpost of Tyran Primus, they discovered entire planets, scoured of all biological life. Not even the simplest bacteria survived on these denuded rocks. In truth, what the explorators had found were the first worlds to be devoured by High Fleet Behemoth after its long and lifeless sojourn through the intergalactic void. Thus far, it had only consumed worlds without sentient life to defend them, for its reserves were depleted from years of hibernation. Soon enough, it would channel the newly absorbed biomass into vast swarms of war beasts, ready to begin the invasion proper. Yet the explorators lacked the context to perceive the peril implicit in this ominous mystery. The Tyran outpost dutifully continued to file reports of dead worlds, and the warning went unheeded. That the Tyran outpost had any chance to prepare for the onslaught was due to sheer chance. A returning survey ship encountered a vast cloud of unidentified objects on the edge of the Tyran system. When those same objects turned out to be strange biological mines, the survey ship fought its way clear of the converging cloud and limped back to Tyran Primus bearing its dire warning. A handful of days later, the invasion began. Commanded by Adeptus Mechanicus Magus Varnak, the outpost of Tyran Primus was no easy prey. Nestled in an ancient chain of volcanic islands, the base was fortified to resist fearsome storms and beasts of Tyran's wild oceans. Moreover, it boasted a substantial garrison of Adeptus Mechanicus and Astra Militarum soldiery, several squadrons of fighter craft, and 4 huge orbital defense lasers set deep inside cement silos. Sheathed in void shields, these huge installations were further supported by a formidable network of gun emplacements and Proteus-class bunkers. It was a defensive strength that had seen Tyran Primus hold off more than its fair share of alien and heretical assaults over the centuries. Against the onslaught of High Fleet Behemoth, however, the outpost's defences would be found wholly wanting. Tyran Primus's defence lasers opened fire the moment the first alien ships made orbit. For more than an hour, the storm-racked skies were split by incandescent blasts as the base's gunners desperately fended off the invaders. Then, just as the cooling systems of the defence lasers began to glow white and overheat, the invaders withdrew. Magus Varnak ordered his small fleet to harry the withdrawing vessels, but this strategy proved folly. Penetrating the spore cloud masking the alien fleet, the pursuing vessels discovered that fewer than a dozen bioships had been destroyed out of a fleet of several thousand. Having lured the cruisers away from Tyran, the Void Swarm fell upon the Imperial vessels with a vengeance. The slaughter that followed was terrible. One vessel after another, torn apart by vast tendrils or swept clear of life by boarding swarms of Genestealers, Rippers, and other monstrous bioforms. With the Imperium's cruisers destroyed, the Hive fleet returned to Tyran Primus. Thousands of Tyrannikites descended on the world. Though the laser defences destroyed many, countless hundreds more crashed into the seas. The waters thrashed and boiled as the invaders burst from their pods and tore their way through the ferocious inhabitants of Tyran's oceans before scaling the outpost's walls. At first, the disciplined volleys of the Imperial Guard drove the creatures back. Officers bellowed orders through the pouring rain. Torrents of firepower scythed through the alien ranks. Wave after wave of Hormagorns and Genestealers were torn apart, their corpses choking the rain-lashed killing zones between the bastions. Thunderbolt fighters darted through the lightning-lashed skies, blasting apart incoming pods with precision fire before turning to intercept new targets. Then, the northern defense laser fell silent. Thousands of gargoyles had thrown themselves into its throat, clogging the massive beam projectors. Moments later, the eastern defense laser ceased firing as an enormous Carnifex rammed through the reinforced steel wall, trampled over the defenders, and hurled itself at the coolant lines. One by one, the thunderbolts tumbled from the skies, engines choked with spores, cockpits torn apart by shrieking harpies. As more and more of the defense network went dark, the Tyrannikites began to fall onto the base itself. An hour later, the Tyran outpost was as good as lost. The bastions were overrun or destroyed, the defense lasers silent. Even the guardsmen of Catachan, men and women who had reckoned themselves amongst the most stalwart of warriors, abandoned their posts and fled into the driving rain in search of an escape that did not exist. Here and there, pockets of resistance still held out under the watchful gaze of a brave or foolhardy officer. But one by one, these were extinguished. Only the command bunker remained, and its walls began to crack under the impact of massive blows. Through the few functioning displays, Varnak saw the flood of aliens rampaging through his base, destroying everything they found. Finally, the adamantine gate of the bunker crashed inwards, and the Tyranids poured into the command complex. Guardsmen and Skitarii fought back with flamers and phosphex, but aliens swarmed through the searing fires and hacked their way onwards. As Hormagorns poured into the command center, Varnak whispered a final prayer to the Omnisire and triggered a switch, sending a data codex plummeting into the depths of the base. This codex would be Tyran Primus's enduring legacy, for it would be recovered many months later by Inquisitor Kryptman, a man who would dedicate his life to opposing the Tyranid menace. But for Kryptman's arrival, Tyranid Primus's fate might have gone unnoticed by the wider Imperium for long years. He found a blasted and sterile planet, unrecognizable as the teeming ocean world it had once been. The planet had been sucked dry, every scrap of vegetation and every drop of water consumed. As Kryptman reviewed the autologs contained within the data codex, the full horror of Tyran's downfall was revealed. Wasting not another moment, the Inquisitor set forth to warn the rest of the galaxy of the oncoming horror from beyond the stars, a horror Kryptman named Tyranids for the world they had consumed. The tyrannic wars had begun. Hive fleets. Even a single hive fleet is a terrible threat, and many such tendrils of the hive mind now push their way deeper into settled space. Worse still, one of the greatest strengths of the Tyranids is their ability to learn and to adapt to the tactics of their prey. As more and more hive fleets surge to attack, and so the hive mind learns ever more swiftly how best to make war upon this galaxy. Though they vary enormously in size, composition, appearance, and predatory method, most Tyranid hive fleets have some key characteristics in common. All consist of a number of hive ships, each a vast, void-going organism, sheathed in feet-thick, chitinous armour, and with a fleshy hide adapted to shrug off the killing cold of space. Though a near infinite variety of physical forms have been observed amongst hive ships, most boast an array of trailing tendrils and hooked talons large enough to coil around miles-long warships and crush them to sparking wreckage. Immense beaks, fanged maws, and colossal feeder proboscis are much in evidence, equally well suited to consuming the harvested biomass of a dying world or devouring a captured space fortress. Yet for all their vast and monstrous might, it is the seething hordes of warrior organisms born within the organ chambers of each hive ship that represents the greatest threat to their prey worlds. Those few brave souls who have trodden the capillary tunnels and pulsating cavities of a hive ship and returned alive tell of monstrous bioscapes. Endless waves of warrior organisms are spawned from within the bubbling organ sacs of their reproductive chambers. Arcing bioelectric currents leap between synapse nodes, the size of electropylons, or reave their dormant forms of Norn queens, even now awakening to command the invasion swarms from afar. Waves of hissing sentry beasts scurry along dripping intestinal tunnels and tear through membranous walls to fall upon the invaders from all sides. At their backs come hulking tarvagons, unsleeping brood beasts that spawn ever more hunter organisms from their grotesquely swollen thoraxes. But most of all is the sight of endless swarms of war beasts, from lesser hormagaunts, termagants, and gargoyles, to the immense and nightmarish bio-titans, held in biostasis and promising apocalypse for whatever world they are vented upon. Even a single such hive ship has the power to tear its way through a flotilla of defense monitors before sowing an invasion swarm onto the surface of a prey world. Yet hive ships rarely travel alone. When an entire living fleet of these nightmarish void monsters descends, they and their endless spawn can strip an entire planetary system of life in a matter of weeks. In their ongoing attempts to codify the Tyranid threat, and in doing so, perhaps to diminish its omnipresent terror, Imperial xenobiologians have named many hive fleets. It has been observed that each such distinct bioflotilla exhibits certain unifying traits that mark its hive ships and warrior organisms out from those of other hive fleets, and serve to characterize the horror of its onslaught. Coloration is one such unifying factor. The creatures of Hive Fleet Behemoth, for example, tend towards hides of blue and mauve, while those of Hive Fleet Kraken are blood red, and those of the ubiquitous Hive Fleet Leviathan are most often purple. What significance such unifying coloration has to a single-minded species like the Tyranids is unclear. Theories abound of everything from instinctual recognition between bioforms of different fleets to predatory terror tactics, or even attempts to confuse and mesmerize prey with shifting patterns displayed upon chitinous armor plates. Each hive fleet also displays distinctive hunting patterns and strategies, almost as though each were an attempt by the hive mind to refine different methods of predating the galaxy's sentient life forms. The warrior organisms of Hive Fleet Jormungandr, for example, favour subterranean assault and deploy immense swarms of tunnelling serpentine bioforms to strike at their victims from below. Hive Fleet Gorgon, by comparison, is infamous for the toxic spore clouds and bio-warfare agents it unleashes in battle. Its prey forced to fight not only the tentacular abominations tearing through their ranks, but also the microscopic Tyranid spores seeking to clog their lungs and dissolve their organs from within. Other Hive fleets have been observed deploying ground-shaking masses of living tanks, sky-darkening swarms of winged monsters, elusive broods of chameleonic apex predators, endless tides of expendable war beasts, and countless other strategic permutations. Many Hive fleets also exhibit a remarkable ability to learn and adapt from each defeat, a tactic that serves desperate defenders well on one battlefield may prove utterly worthless on the next, as the Tyranids manifest some rapidly adapted countermeasure. Veteran warriors confidently deploying tank-busting rounds that previously saw the larger Tyranid monsters burst like sacks of offal stare in horror as those same shells rebound from newly thickened armor carapaces. Wings of bombers soar overhead to rain death on the swarms below, only to discover that this time the hive mind has spawned flocks of winged bioforms that fall upon their aircraft and tear them apart. Tailored gene toxins that dissolve Tyranids into twitching soup in a previous engagement are found to be utterly ineffective against the altered body chemistry of the next wave of war beasts the hive mind hurls in. Most unsettling of all is when such adaptations begin to manifest preemptively, not only on different battlefields, but amongst the swarms of entirely separate hive fleets. How the Tyranids are able to communicate such hard-won lessons is unclear, but that they can suggest nightmarish possibilities to the increasingly beleaguered prey races. One of the most insidious aspects of the Tyranid threat is how hard it is to eradicate even a single one of its tendrils. Should a hive fleet be decisively defeated, either planetside or in the void, some portion of its strength almost always escapes, either running on primal instinct or guided by the hive mind. Organisms go to ground, or flee the theatre of war altogether. For a single world, this can mean fresh nightmares, when the foe, for defeated, rises up again from hidden lairs, sometimes years or even centuries after the original Tyranid attack. On a wider scale, this phenomenon is even more problematic. Should a tendril of a hive fleet be shattered by battle or catastrophe, its survivors become splintered fleets, lesser echoes of the former threat, small enough to slip away into the void and regather their strength. In time, a splinter fleet will attack again, having devoured enough biomass to replenish its ranks, and often benefiting from the lessons of its primogenitor's defeat. The shadow in the war. Settling like a vast and terrible pall across countless worlds, the shadow in the war heralds the coming of the Tyranid hive fleets. It is a nightmarish phenomenon that, whether by accident or design, has proved a cripplingly effective weapon against many of the galaxy's sentient races. The warp is a strange dimension of ever-shifting energies that lies behind the skin of real space. It is a churning and mysterious infinity amidst whose currents the passions, obsessions, sorrows, and joys of all living things find reflection. The warp has been both boon and bane to the galaxy's sentient races. It is a source of near-limitless power for those who can harness it. It is the ocean from which flows the gifts of all psychers. It is also the means by which humanity is spread out across the stars, and by which the Imperium of Man achieves interstellar travel and communication to this day. Yet it is also the realm of timeless and malevolent sentiences, born from the primal emotions of all living things, and hell-bent on consuming reality. It is because of these hostile entities, known as demons, that extreme caution must be exercised when dealing with the warp. However, there is no alternative but to take the risk. Without using the energies of the Sea of Souls, each settled system becomes an isolated candle flame amidst the endless darkness, just waiting to be snuffed out. It is this helpless state of isolation that the shadow in the warp imposes upon the Tyranid's prey. The phenomenon itself is a smothering psychic signal that surrounds the Hive fleets, extending vast distances from them in all directions. Though even races as advanced as the ancient Eldar remain unable to explain how, the shadow invigilates its way into mortal senses and interferes with their connection to the warp. For even the most dull-witted of creatures, this is an unsettling experience, and causes heightened anxiety, paranoia, and panic to spread through prey populations. A sense of all-pervading dread goads frightened mobs to violence and sees doomsayers take to the streets even before the first warnings of the Tyranids' approach are received. It is amongst psychically attuned beings, however, that the shadow in the warp is felt the worst. Human psychers, orc weird boys, and virtually the entire Eldar race are amongst such unfortunates. Their psychic sensitivities are rendering them dangerously vulnerable to the shadow's insidious effects. Some have described the phenomenon as a numbing blanket of static that fills their thoughts and makes it hard even to think or speak. To others, it is the chittering and squealing of a billion nameless horrors, the endless scraping of talons across their minds, or the onset of existential dread so acute that it is all they can do to keep breathing beneath its pall. Those attempting to actively employ psychic powers while engulfed by the shadow in the warp are hit hardest of all. Even to access their gifts at such times requires extreme effort, and those who try are as likely to be driven mad or slain by explosive cranial hemorrhage as to manifest even the weakest flicker of power. Crucially, astropaths attempting to send distress calls out to the wider Imperium find their mental cries choked off, more often than not painfully dying before they can force anything out through the smothering psychic blanket. Navigators are equally afflicted. Their third eyes are blinded and their minds overwhelmed by the shadow, so that attempts to guide evacuation craft to safety or warships to the rescue of beleaguered worlds end in disaster and death. It is thanks to the shadow in the warp that most Imperial worlds beset by the Tyranids must fight alone, cut off from aid and unable even to scream. Nor are humans the only victims of this phenomenon. For most branches of the Eldar race, merely being in proximity to the Tyranids brings torment that they must struggle to ignore if they are to even stand a chance to fight back. Moreover, the precognitive psychic gifts upon which their dwindling race relies are all but useless once the shadow of the warp settles upon them. Warp sorcery falters as easily as more sanctified psychic powers, leaving even the servants of the dark gods howling in powerless fury as the Tyranids descend on them. Only truly psychically inactive races such as the Tau or Necrons have less to fear from the shadow, but even then, the insidious hive mind has methods by which it can weaponize its gestalt will against them to claim victory. It is unclear precisely how Tyranid war beasts manifest powers that echo the psychic abilities of the various races they prey upon. Yet the longer the Hive fleets drive their tendrils into the galaxy, and the more of their swarms that emerge from the outer darkness of the void, the more Tyranids have been observed adapting ever more bioforms whose abilities do just that. Some xenobiologians postulate that these creatures are siphoning warp energy in a controlled manner, wholly removed from anything achieved by any other known life form. Others believe it is the synaptic energies of the hive mind itself that are being channeled, crackling through the encephalitic synapse tissues of the Tyranids before being unleashed in hissing blasts of lethal energies, projected as shimmering force fields, amplified into sanity-shredding psychic screams, or employed to drive lesser swarm beasts into frenetic killing fury. For those facing the Tyranids, such academic theorizing rings hollow. It matters only that the Tyranids are able to employ a ghastly range of apparently psychic abilities to tear apart the minds and bodies of their prey, seemingly with ease. The longer the scholars of the galaxy study the Tyranid menace, the more bewildered they become of the Xenos' interactions with the war. In some ways, the Tyranids appear empirically inert. The Ordo Xenos have pieced together records that show splinter fleets swallowed by war parents, only to emerge from other Imperium phenomena in entirely different regions of the galaxy. Should most races' craft be plunged through the warp like this, they would likely emerge badly damaged or mutated if they emerged at all. The Hive ships appear unharmed by their experience, however, surging from the roiling tides of warp space as hungry and as deadly as ever. Worse, more than one such tendril has burst forth directly into the midst of a settled system. The Inquisitors of the Order Xenos and the Elite Death Watch have also discovered another such insidious phenomenon in the last few centuries. Genestealers are amongst the most prolific of the Hive Fleet's vanguard organisms, moving ahead of the swarms as stowaways aboard Imperial vessels and infiltrating human worlds. Only since the horrors of Goshar Quintus has it become apparent, however, that these creatures are doing more than hunting. It is the Genestealer's gift to infect abducted prey organisms with a gene curse that brings the victims under the Genestealer's sway. More and more of the prey populace are forcibly inducted or born into the resultant Genestealer cult, which festers beneath the skin of Imperial civilization until the day it erupts in full-blown rebellion. As though this were not a threat enough, it has also been suggested that the cults themselves broadcast some manner of mass psychic signal, though it is beyond even the most talented magi to decipher its exact nature or mechanism. What seems apparent, however, is that the Hive fleets can perceive this subtle beacon and follow it to fresh feeding grounds. Such an unholy fusion of human and Tyranid psychic and synaptic potential hints at ominous and terrible nightmares yet to come. Invasion swarms. A Tyranid attack is a harrowing spectacle to behold. The skies darken with roiling toxic clouds, and the descending shapes of hundreds of thousands of tyrannocytes containing brood upon brood of Tyranids. Vast swarms of ravenous monsters flow across the land, slaughtering all in their path. Yet amidst all the horror and chaos, there is an insidious pattern to be observed. While every Hive fleet displays its own predatory method and instinctive tactics, most invade and eventually consume prey worlds in roughly the same manner. This can be seen in the strategies employed by successive Tyranid attack waves, in the spawning of different bioforms in response to the condition of the defenders and their world, and in the shifting tactics employed by the Tyranid swarms both planet-side and in the void above. The nightmare begins with probing attacks intended to test and undermine the prey world's defences. Vanguard organisms, some of which may have lurked upon the planet for months or even years before the attack, suddenly go on the offensive. Lictors and Genestealers act as saboteurs and assassins, disrupting command channels and supply chains with their attacks or spreading terror amongst the prey populace. At the same time, waves of biological invasion craft rain down from on high. Many are inevitably shot down by battery fire and combat aircraft, but more hit the planet's surface and split open to disgorge expendable invasion swarms. Driven on by synapse creatures such as Tyranid warriors, Tervagons, and Hive tyrants, chitinous tides of termagants and hormigons fling themselves at the enemy's defences. What resistance they can overwhelm they do, tearing apart armoured columns, fleeing for safety, and butchering garrisons, trapped behind their own defence lines. Yet this is not the primary purpose of the first waves. Supported from above by thousand-strong flocks of gargoyles, the first waves allow the hive mind to corral the prey, to exhaust their ammunition and spirit, and to test where their defences are staunchest. With battle lines firmly drawn, the nature of the next invasion swarms adapts, dependent on the resistance the hive mind has met thus far. If the prey hide within fortified compounds or have taken to subterranean complexes, the follow-up waves include vast tunnelling swarms of raveners, trigons and morlocks. They may also see an upsurge in the number of living tank analogues, such as carnifexes or exocrines, ready to pummel especially formidable defences to ruin. Should the prey prove resistant in the air, the hive mind hurls in flocks of harpies, hive crones, and monstrous harridans to smash the foe from the skies. Prey who seek to fight a more metaphysical war may be wet with waves of neurothropes and monstrous maleceptors, while those able to shrug off more direct assaults may be undermined by toxic emanations of venomthropes and toxicrines. One by one, the surviving bastions of the prey are toppled. Worn down through attrition or destroyed in mighty conflicts, their armies fall. Where the staunchest resistance is met, the hive mind may even deploy the colossal forms of biotitans, such as the Hierophant or Hierodule, abominations quite capable of toppling even Ork gargants or the god machines of the Adeptus Titanicus. Gradually the fires of battle gutter, as what was a war of resistance becomes a cruel game of cat and mouse, the last surviving defenders seeking to fight back or to escape. Yet by now, the strategies of the hive mind have shifted again, and new bioforms begin to appear amidst the changing landscape of the tortured world. Unknown to the defenders, another war has raged, unseen alongside their own. It is a conflict fought on the microscopic level. For, even as their first invasion swarms assail the planet's defenders, so the hive ships also seed its atmosphere with roiling clouds of inimical spores that are set to work perverting the biosphere. By the time the prey armies have been defeated, the planet's very biology has also been overthrown and harnessed to the Tyranids' foul purposes. Gruesome spore chimneys of flesh and chitin thrust up from the world's heaving surface. Alongside foul sporocysts dropped from orbit, these bioforms pump out ever denser toxic clouds that hasten the subsumption of the planet's biosphere. Bubbling digestion pools yawn wide, grotesque open guts the size of lakes, into which raw biomatter is deposited to be broken down. Pulsing synapse nodes sprout like colossal fungi. Fungi! I cannot say. You don't know how many times I've had to say fungi. I keep saying fungi. Fungi. Amplifying the influence of the hive mind and strengthening the grip of the shadow in the war. Stranger and more nightmarish biostructures erupt around or amidst the few holdouts of the prey, towering talons and lashing nests of tendrils that rip down fortifications and spread parasitic infestations. Meanwhile, the feeder beasts of the invasion swarms are hard at work. From the start of the invasion, swarms of the simple organic eating machines known as Rippers have undulated across the land, devouring the wounded and dead alike. Now trillions of the awful creatures sweep across entire continents, cramming their gullets to bursting point before slithering into the digestion pools to be rendered down along with the biomass they have harvested. At the same time, Herospexes lumber across the land, swallowing whole any prey that defies them and gorging on the fallen, before vomiting their immense meals into the pools for digestion. Only when the last flickers of resistance have been extinguished does the final stage of the invasion begin. The hive ships gather in low orbit, clustering around vast capillary towers like ticks fastening to the flesh of cattle. Here they feed upon the accumulated biomass of the slaughtered world, and of their own dead alike, as it is pumped up the towers to be devoured. Ruthlessly ravenous, the Tyranid swarms break down defensive structures and towering mountains for the minerals that can be extracted from within. They drain the world's oceans dry, leaving barren plains of cracked bedrock in their place. Every last scrap of organic life, down to the bacterial level, is devoured. At the end, even the world's atmosphere is plundered. its protective cowl torn away and scattered into the void. By the time the Hive ships rise once more into the cold expanse of space and prepare to move on, nothing remains of the prey world but a cold, dead husk. The living arsenal. Tyranid weaponry and war gear is entirely organic. Some examples, such as heavy carapaces of chitinous armor, chameleonic flesh, or spore-spewing gas bladders, are integral to the warrior organisms that employ them on the hunt. The rest appear to be grown in the churning innards of the Hive ships and symbiotically grafted to the bioforms that will wield them. Tyranid warrior organisms and their living weaponry make for a repulsive and frightening sight. It is hard for their enemies to perceive where the war beast ends and its armaments begin, for the two are inextricably linked via pulsing tubules, chitinous growths and membranous swathes of melded flesh. Few can fail to miss the ferocious fangs and talons that almost all Tyranids boast, nor the slime-slick and quivering analogues of gun or blade that most carry. Yet in truth, any part of a warrior organism's anatomy may prove a weapon, from sacks of virulent toxins or corrosive bioacids, to fleshy barbs ready to stab forth and impale prey, or other, even stranger and more gruesome weapons. For those not trained in identifying such threats and counteracting them, a myriad of horrible fates await. Many warriors have met their end after believing they had severed a Tyranid's weapon from its body, or after parrying an obvious blow from a chitinous blade, only to be impaled upon concealed stingers, struck by tail-borne bioweapons, or enmeshed in lashing nests of secondary tendrils. In truth, the distinction between Tyranids and their war gear only exists within the minds of prey species, for every Tyranid is as much a living weapon as the symbiotes it wields. Moreover, the utterly alien nature and rapid adaptability of this organic technology is more than a match for even the most advanced prey races. It allows the Tyranids to drag their victims into a feverish arms race in which most prey are ill-equipped to keep pace, and that soon sees them outmatched, outmaneuvered, and fatally outnumbered. The following are weapons commonly encountered across all Hive fleets. The devourer is a projectile weapon whose barrel analogue is a long cone of slowly decomposing meat. Inhabiting this fetid mass are colonies of squirming worms. By sending a bioelectric shock through the cone, the weapon's wielder launches showers of worms that then burrow through their victims' nervous systems until they reach the brain, causing such agony in the process that even those not slain are often driven mad. The largest devourers fire brain leech worms, a particularly sizable and unpleasant adaptation of the basic bioform. The flesh borer is an organic burrow, within which dwell borer beetles. When the weapon is fired, it stimulates the beetles to launch themselves from the barrel with their flea-like rear legs. The creatures then spend their last few seconds of life chewing frenziedly through the bodies of their victims. Flesh borers have been witnessed launching many different types of beetle, from creatures with hardened, armor-piercing chitin to ones awash with biochemical incendiary fluid. The latter are grimly referred to as torch bugs. Usually wielded in pairs, spine fists connect themselves to their host's organism's internal airways via rubbery flesh tubes driven into their bodies. With a sharp, exhalatory spasm, the warrior beast sends pressurized air surging through its spine fists in order to launch a hail of chitinous spikes at the foe. These foul projectiles are coated with tailored neurotoxins, so that the slightest scratch is fatal to the prey. That is, of course, if any of their victims survive being impaled upon the dozens of wicked chitin shards long enough to feel the toxins bite. The hive mind has proven monstrously inventive in its ever-adaptable arsenal of living projectiles, from blunt force trauma and violent impalement to bioelectric shock, acidic corrosion, hemorrhagic detonation, or death by toxin. The ranged weapon forms of the Hive fleets inflict all these fates and more upon their prey. Warrior organisms have even demonstrated the ability to produce their own form of bioplasma that is more than capable of reducing armoured warriors to glowing ashes. Flesh hooks nestle within the thoracic cavities of warrior organisms. These chitin barbed hooks are launched through violent muscle spasm. Not only do they inflict bloody wounds as they punch into their victims, but the sinew cords that connect them to their host organism can be swiftly reeled back in, dragging impaled prey into the monster's embrace. Barbed Strangler. This simple but devastating weapon shunts a barbed seed from its gestation sac to its muscular barrel, within which the seed begins to grow at a grossly accelerated pace. Launched by muscle spasm, the projectile continues to expand as it hurtles through the air, erupting into a flailing mass of hooked tendrils that puncture flesh, gouge eyes, entangle weapons, and lash around throats before constricting savagely. They are especially effective weapons against massed and light-armoured prey. Venom cannons. Venom cannons fire shards of concentrated and crystallized acid, coated in a metallic residue and launched at incredible speeds. Even the lighter breed of venom cannon is highly effective at punching through well-armoured targets. Meanwhile, the heavier variant launches its weightier projectiles at hypersonic speed. The tank-killing rounds, reeved in an electrostatic charge that detonates upon impact. Impaler cannon. This cruel weapon fires chitinous harpoons that are more than capable of punching through even tank armour. At the base of each projectile nestles a parasitic shard beast that feeds off its projectile's internal fluids, until the moment the weapon is fired. At that point, the shard beast's innards are torn out, leaving it trailing fin-like projectiles that it uses to steer its shard into the body of the victim during its last moments of life. Scything talons. Many Tyranid warrior organisms employ a sizable and deadly blade limbs to hack and tear and impale their victims at close quarters. Such weapons rarely exhibit any degree of subtlety, employing the simple expedient of putting massive strength of muscle and sinew behind a long-ridged talon of razor-edged chitin. Yet no warrior who ever saw these scything talons rip through an entire rank of screaming victims before tossing their bloodied and mangled remains through the air would ever mistake simplicity for ineffectiveness. Bone sword. Grown from dense chitin, bone swords have a symbiote grafted into their hilts. This small gobbet of neurotransmissive flesh takes care of regrowing the bone sword's organic blade should it be damaged. Moreover, its web of nerve tendrils are embedded along the length of the weapon, transmitting and amplifying the synaptic energies of the wielder into a lethal field that extinguishes victims' life energies with every blow. This effect is amplified by proximity to other weapons of the same kind, making paired bone swords especially deadly. Rending claw. These oversized claws are rendered particularly deadly by their organic sheaves of diamond-hard and wickedly sharp chitin. With the tailored muscle and sinew of a Tyranid warrior organism behind them, rending claws are quite capable of ripping through adamantine and bonded ceramite, as though it were nothing more than tattered cloth. The damage such ferocious claws can inflict on living flesh can best be described as catastrophic, with a single swipe usually sufficient to disembowel or tear the throat from the prey. Bone mace. This unsubtle mass of gnarled bone, chitin spikes and coiled tendons is most often seen grafted by hulking carnifexes. A dense tangle of tensile ligaments connect the bone mace organism to its monstrous wielder. Their steely strength and instinctive whipcord contractions further augment the already colossal might of the siege beast as it swings the mace at its victims. A solid blow from this weapon can easily stave in a fortified bunker, smash a battle tank onto its side, or pulp any warrior unfortunate enough to stand in its path. Spore mines. Either launched from biovore spore-caster organisms or atmospherically seeded in their thousands from the bellies of hive ships, spore mines are living bombs. They possess internal gas bladders that allow them to drift across the battlefield, trailing their sensitive tendrils behind them as they feel for vibrations that signal the proximity of prey organisms. Once triggered, the spore mines detonate themselves, unleashing a violent storm of chitinous shrapnel and sprays of toxic, venomous, or acidic fluids upon their victims. Hive fleets. We shall now briefly examine some of the more prominent hive fleets before delving into the history of the Tyranids in the conflicts of the First, Second, and Third Tyrannic War. Hive Fleet Gorgon. No other hive fleet has been documented to possess the swift and insidious adaptability of Hive Fleet Gorgon. Its broods have been observed to hyper-adapt, even between one attack wave and the next, outwitting and outpacing even the most strategically flexible prey to their eventual hideous doom. It is the Tau Empire, more than humanity's Imperium, that has borne the brunt of Hive Fleet Gorgon's assault, possibly for as long as several centuries. However, humanity has been unfortunate enough to face Gorgon in battle, as have the Greenskins, the Eldar, and countless other alien races. Two common factors have emerged from these ongoing battles along the eastern fringe of the galaxy. The first is the speed and ingenuity with which Hive Fleet Gorgon has been seen to adapt in the face of resistant prey. The second and more horrific observation is the degree to which this adaptability favours toxic bio-warfare. Hive Fleet Gorgon makes great use of weaponized spores, especially those varieties that billow in microscopic clouds or can be launched from bestial spore-caster organisms. The swarms of Hive Fleet Gorgon advance wreathed in rolling clouds of these devastatingly toxic spores. No rebreather or sealed compartment seems able to keep them out, and even a single lungful can see victims' organs bloat and burst with self-replicating organisms, even as their flesh sloughs from their bones. Sinister broods of venomthropes drift amidst the murk, tentacles whipping out to lash and strangle. They pump out ever more deadly gene pollutants to screen the Tyranid advance and choke the life from the foe. Toxicrines and melanthropes lumber behind them, half-seen primordial terrors that surge from the veil of spores with lesser beasts scuttling around them to crush and trample resistant prey. Every organism in the Hive Fleet has within its body a toxin gland that contains semi-sentient spores. As battle progresses and more of Hive Fleet Gorgon's beasts taste the flesh of their foe, so these spores tailor themselves to the biological makeup of their prey. For each new fragment of gene data, a new effective adaptation is transmitted through the synaptic network. Soon enough, the weapon spores of Gorgon become a biological anathema to the prey organisms they are fighting, rendering even the slightest scratch or skin contact utterly lethal. Should battle rage long enough for this to be the case, the foe will surely be overwhelmed, their armies melting away, often literally, in the face of the Tyranids' gruesome biological warfare. Such tactics have been observed not only to outpace and overcome the rapid technological advancement of the Tau, but aboard the plague hulk Vormnovarex. They even undid the warp-saturated resilience of diseased plague marines. Most recently, as it pushes into systems claimed by the Imperium, Hive Fleet Gorgon has been seeking agri-worlds. If initial inquisitorial assessment of disasters such as that of the Pagrius taint are correct, the resultant spore-tainted foodstuffs may already have been circulated far and wide through neighbouring imperial systems with nightmarish results. My personal belief is that, having consumed the Tau, who harbour within their very genes a talent for rapid evolution and adaptability, this has been transmitted to the rest of the Hive Fleet, so the Tau are to blame. Hive Fleet Jormungandr. Hive Fleet Jormungandr, sometimes referred to as the Great Serpent, hunts in a most unusual fashion. Favouring subterranean movement and sudden shocking assaults, it stays out of sight and keeps its prey guessing. Many are the armed hosts that believe Hive Fleet Jormungandr defeated shortly before they are swallowed up from below. From the first, an assault by Hive Fleet Jormungandr is atypical for the Tyranid menace. Rather than surging toward their prey worlds, its hive ships hang back in the void and employ sinewy dorsal sling organisms to hurl chunks of space debris at them. Believing this to be an attempt at conventional bombardment, prey species do all they can to intercept and blast apart the incoming projectiles. Yet only rarely do they realize their true danger, for each projectile carries within it a living payload, more deadly than an asteroidal impact. Even blasted into fragments, the chunks of debris streak down on trails of fire through the prey world's atmosphere. Within, cocooned in heat-resistant sheaths of living matter, lurk broods of raveners, morlocks, and trigons. Each fragment that makes planetfall disgorges its deadly passengers to burrow deep into the planet's bedrock and begin their campaign of terror. Once Hive Fleet Jormungandr has successfully infested a world, its organisms do all they can to rapidly increase their numbers. Slithering abominations the size of battle tanks churn through the depths beneath the feet of their unsuspecting targets. Perhaps the prey receive some disquieting hints of the threat growing beneath their feet. Outlying mine complexes falling suddenly silent. Tectonic monitoring stations detecting strange spikes in deep strata activity. Catacomb complexes and deep-dug armories vanishing into mysterious chasms. Yet it is rare indeed that the prey will grasp their true peril, especially while fully engaged defending against ongoing attacks from the hive ships on high. Then come the subterranean swarms as the Great Serpent strikes. Tunneling horrors explode from the depths to devour entire garrisons. Swarms burst from hidden tunnels like insects from a kicked hive. Towering fortifications and refugee-packed population centres alike fall to sudden, ravenous attack from below. And one by one, the prey worlds go dark. Even should the defenders somehow see off this onslaught from above and below, the surviving warrior organisms simply go to ground in the deep places their foes cannot reach. There they build their strength once again, even as the unsuspecting prey declare a hard-won victory and begin to rebuild. Soon enough, the serpent rises again, and again, and again. Hive Fleet Kronos. Faced with the sudden upsurge in demonic incursions caused by the Great Rift, the hive mind has been forced to adapt swiftly. Hive Fleet Kronos is an example of its newly refined strategy for doing battle with ethereal enemies that provide no biomass to replenish that expended in driving them back. The swarms of Hive Fleet Kronos fight with unusual strategic caution. Their advance is preceded by a shadow in the warp vastly more powerful than that manifested by any other hive fleet. While some have observed this phenomenon to have a more restricted area of effect than the shadow cast by most other hive fleets, the trade-off is more than borne out by its impact. Kronos' shadow actively drains the life from psychically capable prey, siphoning their energies to fortify the swarm, leaving them as nothing but crumbling husks. Empiric manifestations falter and fade beneath the suffocating shroud. Eyewitness accounts have even sighted warp rifts, shrinking before the Hive fleet's approach, the demonic entities snuffed like candle flames. Of course, all such statements have been suppressed by the Inquisition, for they deal with prescribed warp phenomena. Yet, the fact of Hive Fleet Kronos' contra-imperic powers remains. Once its swarms commit to battle, this Hive Fleet focuses on ranged warfare, and commits to close assault only where victory is guaranteed. Its warrior organisms instinctively conserve biomass, while feeder beasts concentrate on recycling all dead Tyranid matter as swiftly and efficiently as possible. More than one commander has been wrong-footed, as their well-braced static defences were blasted methodically apart by salvos of bioincendiaries, living artillery bombardment, and pinpoint hails of chitinous shards. Hive Fleet Kronos enjoys a symbiotic relationship with the tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan, which have been observed predating, but not devouring, entire worlds' worth of biomass. Following behind the larger fleets, the swarms of Kronos replenish their might from these macabre larders before rejoining the fight against inimical warp incursions. In this way, Kronos' tendrils have slowly worked their way along the fringes of the Great Rift, focusing on chaos-corrupted systems with the potential to threaten the progress of other Hive fleets. They lash out like the stinger of some monstrous beast before withdrawing to regather their strength. It might be tempting for prey races to believe Hive Fleet Kronos an unlikely ally in the fight against chaos. Such hopes are soon dashed. Wherever possible, the swarms of Kronos pick off vulnerable prey worlds, consuming biomass with ravenous ferocity to fuel their ongoing fight against their true enemies. Moreover, these Hive Fleet swarms have been observed targeting psychic prey, be that Eldar craft worlds, sorcerous heretic cults, or human systems in the grip of mass psychic mutation. Whether this is an attempt to absorb more psychic biomass, or to eliminate potential conduits for demonic incursion is unclear. But with the energies of the Great Rift accelerating the psychic potential of almost every race in the galaxy, it is a disturbing and dangerous new precedent. Hive Fleet Hydra. At first glance, Hive Fleet Hydra presents as amongst the smaller and less perilous of its kind. This impression is only reinforced by its hive ship's seeming contentment to lurk in the wake of larger swarms and feed on their scraps. It is only when Hydra surges suddenly forward to attack that the illusion is shattered. Hive Fleet Hydra has only recently arrived in this galaxy. By following routes already taken by larger, slower tendrils of other Hive Fleets, it has made alarming speed toward the galactic core. In order to maintain their reserves of biomass, Hydra's hive ships scavenge mercilessly, devouring the shattered remnants of splinter fleets and defeated tendrils as rapidly as more conventional prey species. Its invasion swarms also descend upon planets that have only recently withstood the onslaught of other hive fleets, finishing off these weakened prey worlds and devouring their despairing defenders. Mega's xenobiologist Ekros van Zendrek has studied Hive Fleet Hydra's advance into the galaxy, after first watching from a safe distance as its swarms consume the mining world of Corstock. Advanced stealth shrines on the Magus' survey ship have allowed him to trail this monstrous quarry while remaining hidden, thus far at least, from the hive ship's senses. Van Zendrek has made and transmitted copious notes on the swift advance of Hydra, extrapolating its unusual tactics from his observations. It is fortunate for the Imperium that this is the case. When the swarms of Hive Fleet Hydra unleash their true fury, it is rare indeed that any prey survive to recount their experiences. Van Zandrek has established that the hive ships of Hydra retain enormous reserves of biomass. They seem able to deploy it with tremendous speed, awakening or spawning huge swarms in a terrifyingly short time span. Moreover, thanks to its rapacious consumption of other splinter fleets' remnants, Hive Fleet Hydra appears to absorb the sense memories of many defeated predecessors and learnt swiftly from them. From a compact core, Hydra can thus spawn sudden, enormous invasion swarms, and vast masses of defensive void organisms at need, all of which possess instincts honed through the depths of all those they have predated. Hive Fleet Hydra's insidious threat response reflex does not end there. During the early stages of planetary invasion, its hive ships seed the upper atmosphere of the prey world with vast shoals of tyrannokites, within which slumber broods of warrior organisms. When bioforms fighting on the surface meet stiff resistance, they send out pulses through the synaptic network as they die. These signals trigger the floating tyrannokites, which plunge groundward, bearing their monstrous cargo to the spot where their fellows were slain. Thus, in slaying one brood of warrior organisms, prey soon find themselves facing thrice that number of foes, then countless more again. Soon enough, even the mightiest defences are overrun by the might of Hive Fleet Hydra's seemingly endless swarms. Hive Fleet Tiamat. Hive Fleet Tiamat is heavily adapted for defensive warfare. This alone has been enough to draw puzzled and alarmed scrutiny from many prey races, for the fleet's behaviour seems atypical of the usual never-ending predatory onslaught. The more that groups like humanity's Order Xenos or the Seers of craft-world Iyanden learn of Tiamat, the deeper grows their dread. Only recently have the prey races of the galaxy begun to suspect the true threat posed by Hive Fleet Tiamat. At least one faction within the Order Xenos has come to believe that Tiamat's vanguard organisms have been present in the galaxy from as early as M35, and that, working slowly and stealthily, these Tyranids have been labouring to fashion some dreadful bioconstruct ever since. Unlike those of other hive fleets, the tendrils of Tiamat have remained concentrated within one region of space. They coil about the Tiamat system that gave their hive fleet its imperial designation. Until recently, they have seemed almost dormant, content to sliver out and snatch away unlucky convoys of merchant craft or overrun worlds possessed of no sentient life. The only time prey species have truly suffered Tiamat's wrath has been when their forces have attempted to investigate or purge the Hive Fleet swarms. At such times, they have found themselves facing tremendously resilient warrior organisms, whose chitinous armour is diamond hard and whose flesh regrows as rapidly as attackers can wound it. Tiamat's swarms fight in overlapping waves, each bulwark capable of soaking up tremendous punishment and bogging down the prey long enough for encircling broods to close about them like a monstrous claw snapping shut. So costly have assaults against Hive Fleet Tiamat proven that, in a galaxy replete with more active invading threats, they have been infrequent and hard to justify. Only now, as the Hive Fleet's tendrils multiply and push aggressively outward, does the folly of such inactivity become clear. Tales abound of a Genestealer cult calling itself the Choir of the Void, whose adherents have arisen on many worlds, only to take ship en masse once their uprisings have succeeded. The choir leave abandoned worlds in their wake, sailing unmolested into the heart of Tiamat territory and bringing great feasts of biomass to their supposed deities. Meanwhile, records resurface of terrible biostructures upon the world of Zephoria in the Tiamat system. As more and more psychers complain of a building psychic scream emanating from that world, those in power begin to ask what fell purpose the Tyranid's biostructure might serve, and what nightmare may befall the galaxy should it reach its completion. Hive Fleet Ouroboris. The swarms of Hive Fleet Ouroboris bring death on dark wings, striking swiftly and in great numbers. Their warrior organisms fill the skies of the prey world and descend with piercing shrieks to rend and tear. Imperial xenobiologists and scholars of alien apocrypha have theorized that Hive Fleet Ouroboris may be the most ancient of its kind. Some point to historical accounts drawn from dust-drowned archives and originally penned by Cardinal Miriamulus the Elder. Miriam Ulyss tells of the Legion of Ouroboris, describing a host of winged Xenos horrors aflame with infernal ague that descended upon the worlds around Thracian Primaris. The Cardinal's accounts detail the Xenos stripping all life from the worlds they invaded, while subsequent investigations by inquisitorial teams have noted distinctive bioplasmic scarring upon relics surviving from the war to defeat this rapacious threat. Other savants, more versed in their biologian arts, cite the primitive nature of Hive Fleet Ouroboris' organisms as an indicator of its antiquity. Organic samples recovered from battles against this Hive Fleet appear almost primordial in their rugged simplicity, especially when compared to the more refined biomorphs of Hive Fleets such as Leviathan or Kronos. Far from being a weakness of Hive Fleet Ouroboris, however, the horrified accounts of those who have battled its swarms reveal this simplicity to be a strength. Strategies refined during the Tyrannic Wars prove ineffectual against Ouroboris' warrior organisms. Armies, expecting to exploit anatomical weak spots, carefully documented instinctive behaviors or vulnerabilities to tailored gene toxins, discover too late that these Tyranids do not possess them. Lessons learnt over centuries of warfare against the Tyranid menace must be hastily discarded in favour of more basic and bloody-minded defensive tactics. It is a realisation that comes to many prey worlds too late to be of aid. Even those who do grasp swiftly how to combat the Hive Fleet face a daunting and nightmarish fight for survival. Its invasion swarms favour airborne organisms, filling the prey world's skies with teeming billions of gargoyles interspersed with descending spore clouds. Larger shapes cut through these living thunderheads, vast aerial monstrosities ploughing through the screeching masses like deep-sea leviathans scattering shoals of fish. So thick do the flying organisms swarm that they blot out the daylight, plummeting to attack in the unnatural twilight cast by their leathery wings. The eerie glow that surrounds their bioweapons, the only light. Their onslaught comes with shocking speed, and wherever possible, Ouroboris' organisms strike at command posts and any prey they identify as being military or spiritual leaders. Masses of chittering, clawing, flapping monsters topple vox masts with their sheer weight, wash out Auspex screens in a blizzard of amorphous contacts, and pluck messengers screaming into the air to be torn apart. In this way, the Hive Fleet claws out the eyes of its prey, blinding them strategically on a planet-wide scale and plunging the defenders into ignorance and panic. Dragged down to the same primitive level as the monsters attacking them from on high, knots of frightened soldiery huddle together for protection. They cower in subterranean bolt holes, staying within the dwindling circles of their light sources and crackling fires, and praying to their deities for salvation. All that comes in answer are fresh waves of Tyranid ground troops and hidden horrors that systematically hunt down every last hidden prey enclave, flushing them onto the surface where, at the last desperate end, the sky swarms descend upon them with exultant shrieks. Only one prey species in the galaxy remains consistently unfazed by the Hive Fleet. Most Orks care little for strategy, and wouldn't recognize global coordination if it grew fangs and bit them. As such, greenskin warbands welcome the onslaught of the skyborne swarms of the Hive Fleet, with the same glee they would any other good fight. More than happy to fight war on a crude and primitive level, the Orks have defeated this Hive Fleet swarms on more than one occasion. The Tyrannic Wars. Behemoth, the First Tyrannic War. Behemoth was the first Hive Fleet recognized by the Imperium of Man. After annihilating the outpost at Tyran Primus, it thundered on through settled space, carving a direct line towards the ultramarine stellar empire of Ultramar. Driven on by a primal hunger it seemed unable to fully control, the Hive Fleet appeared as unstoppable as it was bestially unsubtle. It was only thanks to the efforts of Inquisitor Kryptman, who followed in Hive Fleet Behemoth's wake, that warning reached Ultramar ahead of the Tyranid menace. The Ultramarines gathered virtually the entire strength of their chapter to meet the Xenos onslaught. They marshalled their mighty defense regiments of Ultramar and the strength of entire Void fleets to their banner. Still, it was to prove barely enough to halt Behemoth's rampage. The Tyranids overran, one world after another, consuming biomass and redoubling their ranks as they drove toward the Ultramarines' chapter planet of Macragge. The idyllic garden world of Prandium was stripped bare. The caverns of Calth became bloody charnel houses. One slaughter followed another, yet it was in Macragge itself that the fate of the First Tyrannic War would be decided. Here, Chapter Master Manius Calgar led his warriors in a masterful campaign, doing all they could to resist the Hive Fleet's attack waves and bleed away its strength. Calgar himself was sorely wounded by the monstrous bioform known as the Swarm Lord during the Battle of Cold Steel Ridge. For a time it appeared that Hive Fleet Behemoth would consume all before it. Eventually, a powerful ambush performed by the Ultramarines' mauled Void Fleet and the newly arrived ships of Battlefleet Tempestus saw the Hive Fleet shattered above the ringed world of Circe. Meanwhile, on the surface of Macragge, the Tyranid swarms were finally defeated by the unyielding resistance of the Ultramarines garrisoning the planet's polar fortresses. Yet the victory came at a terrible cost to the defenders. The Ultramarines' precious First Company was slain to the last by the ferocious onslaught of Hive Fleet Behemoth. It was a wound the Ultramarines would not soon recover from. The splinters of Hive Fleet Behemoth scattered from Macragge and continue to bedevil Ultramar and the wider Imperium to this day. They are characterized by a brutish lack of subtlety, quite at odds with the cunning and more recently arrived tendrils. Those who have fought against this Hive Fleet and somehow survived report hulking masses of heavily armoured war beasts such as Carnifexes and Tyrannofexes, much in evidence. Supported by lumbering bioartillery and teeming swarms of lesser beasts, these living fortresses stampede across the land and smash headlong into whatever bars their path. Wave upon bludgeoning wave is unleashed by the brutish-looking hive ships in orbit, the hive mind seeking simply to smash its prey to their knees with its clubbing blows before finally delivering the coup de grace and beginning its victory feast. Second Tyrannic War. Following the defeat of Hive Fleet Behemoth, some Imperial observers believe the Tyranid threat over. Humanity has outlived countless such Xenos threats, they pointed out, each destructive in their own right, yet ultimately minor in the grand scheme of the wider Imperium. Several centuries passed before this assumption was proved the worst sort of foolish optimism. The onset of the Second Tyranid invasion, which would subsequently be named Hive Fleet Kraken, was subtle and insidious. This new Hive Fleet divided its strength amongst many separate tendrils. This allowed Kraken to assail many planetary systems all at once, and also spread the shadow in the warp across a much wider area of space. As a result, it took a long while for word of the invasion to reach Imperial authorities. Many worlds were devoured during this delay. Once the Imperial counterattack began, and the Second Tyrannic War was officially declared, humanity discovered the true nature of this new threat. Hive Fleet Kraken was a wily ambush predator that sought ever to encircle, outflank, and surprise its prey. Vanguard organisms swarmed before it, destabilizing worlds with acts of surreptitious slaughter and sabotage. Tunneling organisms undermined human defense lines, slipping past especially formidable points of resistance to attack from unexpected quarters. Kraken attacked on more fronts than the Imperium could defend, forcing its prey to sacrifice lower priority worlds and systems in order to protect more strategically vital locations. All the while, the pale hides and crimson chitin of Hive Fleet Kraken was sighted in more and more systems, and the armies of humanity could do little but retreat before the alien invaders. A number of Space Marine chapters sprung to the fore during this desperate fighting retreat. Their valor was undeniable, as was their success in wounding and slowing the advancing threat of the Hive fleet. Yet their defiance cost the Space Marines dear. The Scythes of the Emperor and the Lamenters were both mauled terribly, driven to the brink of extinction, while the Knights of Eternity chapter was wiped out altogether. The decisive battle against Kraken came when the Hive fleet drew its greatest tendrils together and drove them towards the Hive world of Ica IV. No one has been able to determine why the Hive fleet's behaviour changed, but it was in this moment that Imperial commanders had a chance to score a decisive victory over the rapacious Xenos. The Tyranids deployed many previously unseen warrior organisms during the grinding and bloody conflict that followed, even unleashing Bio-Titans for the first time. Yet, it was Chapter Master Marnius Calgar who led the fight back, arriving on Ica IV at the head of a mighty Ultramarines force and coordinating a masterful defense that finally saw the Xenos scoured from the planet's surface and the surrounding void. Hive Fleet Kraken had been decisively defeated, albeit at the cost of Ica IV's ruination. Yet with dozens of splinter fleets and lesser tendrils still scattered, it was far from a spent force. The Eldar of Craft World Iyanden had greater forewarning of the approach of Hive Fleet Kraken. Their Farseers perceived the doom drawing nigh through the skeins of fate, while their Rangers brought back first-hand accounts of the alien swarm fast approaching. Yet the Craft Worlds are immense and stately vessels, with no capacity for warp travel or swift escape. It soon became clear that Craft World Iyanden would not be able to evade this threat, but rather would have to meet it head-on. Farseer Kelmon, Iyanden's leader and most potent seer, warned that the entire population would have to mobilize as one if there was to be any chance of defeating Hive Fleet Kraken. With heavy hearts, even the most peaceful of Iyanden's Eldar donned the armor of Guardian Defenders and joined the ranks alongside the powerful Aspect Warriors and perilous engines of Vor. Even the spirits of the Craft World's dead were recruited, drawn from its mystical infinity circuit and into spirit stones that allowed them to pilot mighty Wraithbone war constructs. Iyanden's void fleets were recalled, elegant warships taking up station about their craft world, ready to protect it from attack. Then came the Tyranids, and the nightmare began in earnest. One wave of void-born organisms after another descended upon Iyanden. The Eldar warships fought with breathtaking grace and skill, slaughtering the attackers until the void was fouled with drifting meat and ichor. But one by one, they were overcome, until at last a huge attack wave fell upon the craft world itself. The Eldar counterattacked furiously wherever the Tyranids breached their crystal domes and winding corridors. Yet they could not stem the monstrous tide. Thousand-strong swarms of warrior organisms battered down each new defense line in turn. Insidious predators stalked softly lit passageways and reduced formerly beautiful Wraithbone chambers to blood-drenched abattoirs. The Dome of Crystal Seers, the Forge of Vol's Fury, the Library of Sighs. These and countless other irreplaceable treasures were destroyed amidst the slaughter. The death toll rose until Iyanden's dead outnumbered its living defenders. It was as the last embers of hope for survival were dying that Prince Yril and his Corsair fleet swept to the rescue. Yril was an exile from the craft world, yet in its hour of darkest need, he could not abandon his former home to its fate. Though the fight was bloody and desperate, the newcomers cut apart the Tyranid hive ships until none remained. Then, wielding the cursed Spear of Twilight and leading a fierce force of veteran warriors, Prince Yril boarded Iyanden. It was he who slew the monstrous hive tyrant that led the invasion swarm, and he who led the subsequent purge of every last warrior organism after Farseer Kelman was found dead atop a mound of Tyranid corpses. Prince Yril had returned to Iyanden and earned his people's forgiveness with his selfless actions, but even still, Kraken had wrought terrible slaughter throughout the craft world. The Tyranids might be defeated, but their legacy would remain in the slow decline of what remained of craft world Iyanden. The Third Tyrannic War. Only years after the defeat of Hive Fleet Kraken at Ica 4, Hive Fleet Leviathan drove its tendrils up through the galactic plane. The largest and most widespread Hive Fleet to date, Leviathan showed clear signs of having learned from the fates of Behemoth and Kraken. Its swarms continue to pose an all-pervading threat to life in the galaxy. By the time of Hive Fleet Leviathan's invasion, numerous other lesser Hive Fleets had been recognized as threats by the Imperium. Some were splinters of Behemoth or Kraken. Others were entirely separate and strangely adapted entities in their own right. Many, once Leviathan began its onslaught, moved to support, shelter behind, or even parasitize this largest of Hive Fleets yet known. Leviathan's swarms were legion. Its tendrils spread out so that no corner of the galaxy was safe from the Tyranid menace. Imperial forces, who survived the onslaught of Leviathan, reported an alarming upsurge in the number of psycho-analog warrior organisms amongst its ranks. The synaptic network that linked this Hive Fleet appeared especially powerful, its shadow in the warp smothering and tremendously potent. Here was the Tyranid threat writ larger and more terrible than ever before. Great armies, even entire Xenos races, fled before its inexorable advance. Amongst the first Imperial war leaders to take the fight to Hive Fleet Leviathan was Inquisitor Krypton. Believing the ends justified the means, the Age Inquisitor employed every resource he had amassed in his long and bloody career. He unleashed a wave of exterminator strikes upon worlds in the path of Leviathan's tendrils. Krypton reasoned that if enough planets could be rendered lifeless in the path of the swarm, the Tyranids would be starved and their onslaught slowed. His horrific methods met with some success, but they were too much even for his Machiavellian peers. Trillions of Imperial lives had been lost to Krypton's purge. He was accused of heretical arrogance and declared excommunicatoris. Yet, Krypton was not done. He next engineered the release of a brood of captured Genestealers within the bounds of the Ork Empire of Octarius. Sure enough, a tendril of Hive Fleet Leviathan was drawn after the synaptic signal of the brood, ploughing into the Greenskins' empire and igniting a ferocious war. Krypton had hoped the Xenos would annihilate one another. However, he was mistaken. Untold numbers of Greenskins provided the Tyranids with a nigh inexhaustible supply of biomass that saw their swarms grow daily. The Orks, meanwhile, thrive on battle. In the Tyranids they found the fight of their lives. Larger and more belligerent Greenskins were reported all the time by the outmatched Imperial forces caught up amidst the alien war. Soon enough, the fighting in the Octarian Empire threatened to spill out across neighbouring Imperial sectors. Hoping to stem the tide before it reached critical mass, Inquisitor Nasir Sahansun and many of his comrades sought to establish a defence line, the Cordon Impenetra, that would contain the tumultuous Xenos war. Yet their containment wall was far from complete by the time the Tyranid and Ork forces assailed it. The situation grew more grave by the day. This was but one example of the multitudinous, catastrophic war zones that erupted wherever Hive Fleet Leviathan struck. The shrine world of Saint Caspelan was transformed into an abattoir by the combined efforts of tunneling horrors and the insidious stealth organism known as Death Leaper. Here was proof that faith alone, no matter how fervent, was no defence against this terror from the outer dark. Battlefleet Ultima lost more ships than they could afford during the Battle of Bloodstar, their captains discovering too late that the hive mind had learned much of ambush tactics since last they had battled its swarms. The mighty Forge world of Griffin 4 also fell to the tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan, all its precious knowledge lost to the devouring maws of unthinking beasts. The systems of Pyrehaven, Ninth Gift, Josimir's Rest, and Abdrala all fell silent and dark, their last cries warning of Tyranids attacking from the far reaches of Segmentum Obscurus to the heartlands of the Segmentum Solar. It was even as the flames of the Third Tyrannic War raged higher that the Great Rift tore open. This calamitous chain of warp storms split the Imperium in two, leaving fully half the Emperor's realm cut off from the Astronomicon. Such lost and darkened systems were easy prey for Leviathan. Even those worlds, fortunate enough to remain within the Emperor's light, were battered by demonic phenomena, plagues of mutation, and catastrophic collapses in communication and coordination. Everywhere, Hive Fleet Leviathan surged forward, taking advantage of mankind's confusion as a lunging predator into the midst of panicked and scattering prey beasts. Yet the hive mind did not have things all its own way. Though the bedlam caused by the Great Rift aided it in many ways, it also saw vast swathes of the galaxy plunged into maelstroms of empiric madness or overrun by malevolent warp entities. Such beings offer no sustenance to the swarm, and so Hive Fleet Leviathan was forced to adapt new methods for fighting these inimical hosts. Before they starved it of biomass by slaughtering or tainting its prey beyond consumption. In this way, the hive mind inadvertently joined the fight against chaos, albeit entirely for its own sake, while still devouring all prey races that crossed its path. The Battle for Baal. One of the greatest and most calamitous battles of the Third Tyrannic War occurred in the Baal system, but this was the end result of a much longer campaign fought by the Sons of Sanguinius to hold back the tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan. Eventually, they were pushed back, and were aided in the defense of the Primarch's homeworld of Baal by vast armies drawn from the blood of Sanguinius. Almost a legion strength force faced off against one of the mightiest tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan ever witnessed. The tendrils of Hive Fleet Leviathan pushed into the Cryptus system initially, intended to act as a fortified shield against the threats approaching the Blood Angel's homeworld of Baal. The system was nonetheless overrun. A desperate counterattack led by Chapter Master Dante, and some say aided by Xenos allies, stalled the Tyranid advance, but nothing could now halt it. Pushing deeper into the region of space known as the Red Scar, the Tyranids bore down upon Baal. Editor's note: if you would like more information on this vast campaign, please follow the links in the description to this Voxcast for the full campaign history of the Cryptus system. Knowing that his chapter faces a fight for its very survival, Dante summoned all of the Blood Angel successor chapters to help defend Baal. Many hastened to their primogenitor's aid, including the ferocious flesh-tearers and even the excommunicated Knights of Blood. Uncounted Tyranid swarms from the interstellar darkness drove towards Baal and its moons. Though the vast Void War rages for many hours, even the amassed might of multiple Imperial fleets could not hold the Tyranids back. Invasion swarms descended upon Baal, Baal Prime, and Baal Secundus alike. Having unearthed and rebuilt mighty fortifications dating from before the Horus Heresy, the Blood Angels and their successors dig in and withstand the Tyranid onslaught. Hive Fleet Leviathan employed every tactic and trick it knows, and spawns every abomination in its biological arsenal. It even manifests the Swarm Lord to command the intensifying assault. By the time the Tyranids have hurled 19 successive attack waves into the fight, the defenders are on their last legs. 5 chapter masters lie amongst the slain. The doom of the Blood Angels and of their successors is at hand. But then, it is in the most desperate moment that the Great Rift tears its way across the galaxy. The hive ships of Leviathan's tendril are swallowed up by the roiling fury of the rift, vanishing in an instant, though no one knows to where. Yet the fight is far from over. On Baal Prime, the demonic lord Kabanda leads a vast demonic invasion out of the rift to butcher space marines and Tyranids alike. Only the total sacrifice of the Knights of Blood chapter sees Gabriel Seth and the last of his flesh terrors make their escape. Meanwhile, on Baal itself, the overwhelmed Blood Angels and their allies stage their last stand. Dante hurls himself into battle with the Swarm Lord, suffering ghastly wounds, but succeeding in lopping its head from its shoulders at the last. As the warp storms scatter away and the fires die from Baal's tortured skies, a new fleet is revealed in orbit. In place of the Tyranids, there are instead void ships of the Indomitus Crusade, arriving just in time. Rabute Gilliman himself leads the drop assault that at last sees the Tyranids purge from the Blood Angels' ravaged homeworld. And so, the war goes on. The Tyranids, perhaps the greatest threats facing humanity in this, its darkest hour. And there we have it. Thank you for watching, everybody. Please do give the video a like and subscribe, and please do leave a comment. All these things help assuage the machine spirit, the almighty algorithm, and I can use all the help I could get, honestly. So I really appreciate it. If you'd like to help the channel in this way, please do. Really helps. Remember to hit the little bell as well, so you'll be alerted to new videos, and whether I decide to do an impromptu ranty live stream where I play computer games very badly. But yeah, thank you to everybody watching. Thank you to everybody supporting the channel. Your names are scrolling by as we speak. I try and update this as regularly as I can. If I've missed your name, it'll be on the next one, hopefully. I am lazy as well. I am lazy, it's a problem. But thank you to everybody. You guys are the ones who really make this all carry on. Without your support, I don't know where I'd be. And thank you to everybody who does. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider becoming a YouTube member or a supporter over on Patreon. The links are in the description. Whatever you do, I really appreciate it. Thank you. I'll be back again with more stuff very soon. And yeah, that's all I've got to say. Thanks for watching. I'll be back again soon. Bye-bye. Ta-ra.